what I'm curious about, and every time we get together, it makes me even more curious.
Right.
Is this thing of meditation. And it's something that, for me, I've experienced a lot of joy in my life when I have been meditating, right? And for different people, meditation means different things.
Right.
And there's all these different ways of meditating, or forms of meditating, or teachers, or things like that. But when we're together, you often express to me that there's no distinguish between when you're meditating formally, practicing whatever you want to call it. Right. Sitting there in the position of meditation or whatever. And then when you're outside of that and we're having a conversation, you express to me that you're also meditating in that point. Or like you meditate not all the time, but as much as you can. Right. So I don't really know where I'm going with this, besides the point of like, can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I think that I realized when I first started meditating, I realized that, I came into this state of calmness and I felt quite good. And that was something that I was looking for at that point in my life, because I was very much not feeling good, and I was very much not feeling calm. So meditation gave me that. But I would soon realize that the moment I stopped meditating, the meditation stopped doing anything. And also, when I was out and about in my life, I couldn't meditate because meditation required me to focus. And you can't really focus while you're doing other things because they require your focus. So doing your work, having a conversation, or even doing something while talking to someone, all these things require you to focus your attention on different places.
For example, us sitting here.
Talking
about what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Filming this podcast.
Exactly. If I was to focus on my breath or something, then my attention would be fighting between focusing on my breath and on what you were saying, and so on. So I came to realize that what I thought was meditation was actually concentration. And I came to realize that concentration was not what I was looking for in my life. Because learning to concentrate on the breath, on a candle of a flame, or on a visualization, or whatever it was, that just made me better at concentrating. And while concentrating can certainly be a good skill for many things, concentration doesn't really have anything to do with meditation. And one of the things we talked about once is that, I think I said to you, or maybe it was when we were meeting with the group, is that when you hear about meditation, people are always talking about, they're talking about opening their mind, they're talking about expanding their consciousness. We talk about consciousness expanding drugs and all these things. No one is talking about narrowing their consciousness. Isn't that funny? And concentration is always narrowing your consciousness. If you're only focusing on the breath, that's a very narrow way of having your consciousness. So I came to realize that meditation was not concentration. Meditation is an opening. And it took me many years to understand exactly what that was. But when I understood it, I understood that not only could I meditate at all times, as long as I remembered, but when I was meditating, it actually made everything I did much more effective, harmonious, and skillful. So that's sort of the lead-in to that. Because try and go through your day and focus on your breath. You have to do all kinds of other things. You have to go out of the breath, you have to talk to people, you have to not walk into things, you have to do all kinds of things. And so I found what I really wanted, of course, I wanted peace and calm, but I also wanted the ability to master, to live skillfully. And concentration meditation did not make me live skillfully. Actually, I became less skillful because now there was a tug of war between my meditation object and life which demanded my attention in different sort of ways, and that became a conflict. And I was never able to resolve that conflict.
So it became quite difficult, right, to meditate, concentrating on something outside of the meditation practice.
Exactly.
In your day-to-day life, because you would, or for example, at work or having a conversation with somebody, or these kind of things required your attention, like you said.
Exactly.
So what? So I'm just really curious, what happened next? Like, did you find a different way of meditating that didn't require concentration, that required something else, that you were able to practice all the time? Well, you're here now, and you're living that, I guess.
Right.
So what does that look like, or what is that?
Well, if you look into the spiritual traditions of the world, you'll find that this path of concentration is a very ordinary one. You'll find that that's where you almost nowhere, everywhere you look, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, even Christianity actually has meditation. There are monks that meditated. No matter where you look, you'll find this concentration and cultivation idea. But then you'll also find that there were these crazy old uncles who went around and messed with these people who talked about concentration. There were these people who would say things that didn't make sense and make fun of these people who were sitting and concentrating. And they would say upsetting things to them that would make you believe that there might be another different and easier way. Because they would sort of, the old Zen masters, the old Taoists, and people like them, they would sort of tease the people sitting there concentrating, straining hard. There's a famous quote put to a yoga master where someone asks him, what exactly does bending your body into the shape of a pretzel have to do with spiritual enlightenment? And these sort of things. So I came to see in these spiritual religions that there were these old jokers who would mess with these people who were very diligently practicing their meditation. And they'd say things such as like, you're already it, what are you looking for? They'd say things such as, if you're gonna be sitting there and concentrating on this stuff, like what good are you? What use can you be to the world sitting there like that, tensing yourself? And so I started to look into the words of these strange masters who were saying things that didn't make much sense. Essentially, they were saying, you are already it. And they would have, one of the arguments they would have that struck me really hard, and these kind of arguments, when you are a seeker on the path and you train diligently, these kind of arguments hit you hard, because they irrefutably create a problem with the idea of practice. And one of those things they would say was that if what you're looking for is your original nature, how are you going to find it? By trying to practice some technique you learned from outside of yourself. If you're looking for your original nature, how are you going to find it outside of yourself? And if finding your original nature is something you have to achieve, then what if you lose it again? Because obviously, if you have to find it, then you can just as well lose it again, because right now you have lost it. So clearly you can lose it again.
So if you're not finding it,
right,
and then if you do find it, then you can lose it.
Right, and if you
you
practice it, and you're a Buddha while you're practicing, and then you stop practicing and you're no longer a Buddha, then you're not really you're just a practice Buddha.
So then, what would you suggest? What are you suggesting? What are these uncle masters?
These jokesters.
These jokesters. What are they?
Well, they were suggesting that you were already it. That right now, as you are, was the whole thing, and they would say that obviously it would have to be that way, because unless it was something that was already here in your experience, then it would just be another thing that you could gain and lose. And the whole point of spiritual enlightenment was to get something that you can't lose. You know, everyone who walks this path is looking for something they can hold on to forever, even past death for some people, right? They're looking for something secure which you cannot lose. But even if you achieve enlightenment, who's to say you won't lose it again? Because right now you don't have it. So what these masters said was that what you're looking for is already there, you just need to change the focus.
Change the focus?
Change the focus. It must be present in your experience at all times. If it isn't, then how could it be your original nature? How could it be your original mind? How could it be your true self or higher self? There was a monk who asked the Zen master, he said, how do I accord myself with the great way? And the Zen master said, what do you think the great way is that you could be out of accord with it? In other words, he said, you can't accord yourself with the great way because you can't in the first place be away from it.
So if you can't be away with it, and you're already it,
right?
How does one experience that or come into that?
Do you hear the wind above?
Yeah, I noticed the wind above.
Well, then that's it.
So I must ask the question, right? Because if you're somebody listening, I imagine you're also wanting this. Like if your mind's kind of saying, okay, well that seems like way too simple.
Right.
You're already it, and then you notice the wind, and then that's it. It's like it just seems It seems like. At least my mind is saying like, that's too simple or something.
Right, but here's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything more simple than what you already are?
I guess not. And so you're suggesting that this meditation that you do formally or informally or is in everyday life is what you focus on in each moment to bring you into this already knowing, or this already, not already knowing, but you being already it kind of thing.
Right. It's difficult to put into words because it's just who you are. It's not something you can really explain, and that's why it's difficult for the mind, because the mind is an explainer. But the way it's usually explained is like this. People talk about awareness, they talk about how to become more aware and all these things. But when we sit here, I sit here with you, I hear the wind in my ears without trying to. In fact, I can't stop it. I'm effortlessly hearing the wind. I hear the fireplace. My eyes see the light of the flames. I'm not trying to be aware of it. It happens automatically. Everything in all of my 5 senses, as well as the 6th sense, which I will call the thinking sense, where thoughts come. From the smell of the fireplace, the taste of whatever it is we're tasting, the feeling of the warmth on my skin, the winds in my ear, and the light in my eyes. Everything is reporting to the same awareness without any effort. I don't have to try to be aware. And if right now you were to call my name, even though I was totally immersed in this experience, I would instantly hear what you said, and I would know you were talking to me. So what's this idea about concentrating or being aware? Clearly I am always aware all the time. Everything reporting to my awareness. And when you talk to me, I hear you, but I don't need to try to hear. And this hearing without trying, this is the meditation I'm talking about. This seeing without trying to see, hearing without trying to hear, feeling without trying to feel. Everything is already perfectly managed. Just abide in this awareness that is already functioning. It doesn't even matter where you put your attention, because if you put your attention in front of you and something happens behind you, you still hear it. So every moment, every day, all I do is just let life report to me in all my senses at all times. And where this gets difficult, I'm sure even the listeners right now, they don't find it much difficult. But where this gets difficult is the 6th sense. Now I don't mean the sense of a magical danger sense. I talk about the 6th sense as the sense of thinking. And the 6th sense is difficult because when a thought comes, if a bird sings outside, then that sound just enters my ears and it exits again and I don't think about it. But if a thought arises in my head, then for some reason all the 5 senses come and go without any problems. But if a thought comes, then I feel I have to do something about it. So if I sit here and a thought comes up and the thought says, I wonder what I'm gonna do, I wonder what I'm gonna eat for lunch tomorrow. Then for some reason, instead of realizing that this thought is exactly the same as the wind, or the fire, or the heat, I either start thinking about that thought, or I may, if I'm a spiritual person, think that that thought should go away because I don't want any thoughts. And when I do that, I leave this place of effortless awareness and I go into thinking. And it's interesting because both in Danish and English we have the same expression, is that we say that a person was not in their senses, and in Danish we say something similar. So, or we say he's out of his mind. But when you go into thinking, you go out of your mind, you go out of your senses. And then you don't see the fire, you don't hear the wind, you don't feel the heat, you don't smell the smoke. Suddenly, for a estimated time, you are completely gone from your senses. And then at some point you come back. And so meditation, the only thing you have to do to meditate is when a thought arises, you don't need to think about it. You don't need to get rid of it. Just consider a thought to be just like a sound of the birds or the wind, to be a momentary phenomena that comes by itself and goes by itself, from nothing into nothing. And you just remain exactly as you are, in that place where everything arises and is heard, seen, smelled, felt, thought. So the only meditation I do is all day I just try to remain the way I am and not get involved with thoughts. And that requires no concentration. And it's not a technique or an effort because I'm actually doing less than people normally do. Normally people would think, or they would try to fight with thoughts. I don't even do that. So all I really do is I just stay as I am, as much as I can remember. And a really practical way of that is, for example, when you're talking, right, every time you talk, then a thought may come up in my mind that says something that I want to say, or some kind of concern, or some kind of fear, or where we're going, or do I know what I should say, or whatever. And then this is a very practical way of practicing it, is I just let that thought go, and I let myself naturally be where I'm listening to you speaking. And that may sound like a kind of concentration, but I'm not specifically concentrating on what you're saying. I'm just staying in myself where all my senses arise. And so without trying, I hear everything you say and I understand everything you say without trying to understand. Because that's already happening in me at all times, because the human mind is kind of like a mirror in that it reflects everything that comes before it without any intention. So like I said before, if while you and me are talking right now, a crow was to call outside, we would both hear it, even though we were talking. Spontaneously we would hear that sound, we would realize it was a bird, we would estimate just about where it was, and we would realize that it was probably a crow if we know what a crow sounds like. But that didn't happen because we wanted to or because we were concentrating. It happened despite the fact that our attention is right here, right now. So to sum it up, in other words, there's no real need to meditate, because actually you are meditation. What you need to stop is stop practicing non-meditation. Or we could say it another way, your very nature is meditation and awareness. What you need to stop practicing is running after thoughts. Because you have a child in there, and that child has not yet come to a point where it starts running after thoughts. But at some point, that child will go from the state it is in now. How old was she? 8 months old?
8 months, yeah.
That state where she has no thoughts or anything. And at some point when she's 3 or 4, thoughts will, or maybe earlier nowadays because kids are so evolved, thoughts will start coming in her mind, and they will come and go. She won't think about them. But at some point through interacting with you and the way you talk and the way you think, she's going to start interacting with those thoughts. And she's going to say, this is my thoughts, this is my mind. And at that point, she's out of the Buddha mind. At that point, she becomes self-conscious. And so what we're doing, learning to meditate, is just we're going back to that natural state of thoughts just rolling without being engaged with. And then we find that we are just the center of the universe where everything is perceived and arises effortlessly. Complete, total awareness at all times. And that's just what I try to do every day. How much of that makes sense to you?
Actually, a lot of it does make sense to me in my own experience, I guess. And what I notice is that from years of I keep going to say practice, but the years of experiencing what you do with meditation, you're able to put so clear clarity, like the clarity of words around it is incredible. So I yeah. But for people listening, to put it in another way, or like in a kind of, maybe in a more digestible way, I guess you could say.
Right.
Which is, I actually think what you said is quite, well, now I'm thinking, it's quite digestible actually. So, but it sounds like this meditation that you talk of is not so based around sitting there concentrating on the breath or concentrating at all actually, in fact, but actually more about being in what is right now.
Right.
And that is largely around the senses that you mentioned.
Right.
And part of that, what I hear as well and experience also in my life when I'm aware or meditating or present or whatever you want to call it, is this importance of being with whatever that is in your experience.
Right.
And these senses kind of bring us back into that.
Right.
And the mind, from what you were saying, takes you out of that place, out of the awareness or
and I think
that natural kind of natural state of.
And everything, and I think it's kind of a beautiful thing because everything you see, you experience in your senses, I also experience because we're here together, which means we're experiencing something that you and I can share. This is real, but everything that comes from thinking is not real. We can't share it. We can't share our thoughts. We can't share our dreams. We can't share our internal sort of experience because it's ultimately not real. But the fire, the wind, the feeling of the heat right here, this is the real world.
But the crazy thing is how the mind works with our body, right?
Right.
Because our minds can have such strong thoughts, or just a thought actually.
Right.
Let's just call it a thought, like a cloud. But we often can get attached to that thought.
Right.
Or it can bring up a memory or something in our past that then creates that thought into what seems like a reality or seems like it's very much real, even though that it can be very distant from what is actually happening in our experience. But it can feel so real that in our body we actually react to that emotionally as well.
Right.
And that takes us completely out of this our senses and our kind of our body or our awareness or that part of us that you're.
But that's why this the reason why this sort of meditation or non-practice, we could call it practicing non-practice, because you're really practicing not doing something which is called thinking. But anyway, what makes this so wonderful is that when I'm here, when I'm in this state, in this body, listening to these words and to your words, and I'm not thinking, then I experience the totality of this moment, all my senses. I experience this moment completely as it is, which means my actions will be in alignment with what actually is. And that means in every situation I am in, if I manage to be in this state, my actions will be in complete harmony with everything in my environment and every person in my environment. Because I am acting off of the real-time data of what is exactly around me. And the human mind is able to see more deeply than we think. So I'm not just acting off of what I can see, hear, feel, think, or whatever, but I'm also to some degree, depending on what you believe, acting in accordance with what is going on in the people around me. Things inside them that are distinguished in my mind. Now, even if you don't believe that, you will agree that if you're taking your action out of the information of everything that is around you and inside you, the real data, then your actions will be incredibly skillful. But if your information is coming from thinking and old pain and past patterns and reactions, then your actions will be incredibly unskillful because you're not reacting to the moment, you're reacting to yourself. So for example, if I look at you, Jonathan, and I think you're sad, then if I'm reacting to myself, then maybe I'd, go over and give you a hug or whatever, or maybe I'd try to stay away from you or whatever, because my experiences in my past was, my mother wanted to be alone when she was sad, or my father wanted a hug when he was sad. So if I come in with the past, then I react to myself and to the past, and I try to force that interpretation into this moment.
Yeah.
But if I'm in this moment, what would I do? I will observe myself. What do I feel? Where am I? Well, I'll observe you. Where do you feel? Where are you? And then I will act out of that moment. And then I can actually see, does Jonathan want a hug? Or does he want to be alone? I'll be able to see that. Because
by sensing it?
Well, by looking at your body language, or, we humans are very strong at reading body language. So actually this kind of thing we can sense. Believe it or not, we can sense this kind of thing if you trust yourself. So if I am not full of myself, but simply if I abide in all the information there is in this moment, then I'll be able to have a very, very educated way of acting. And so I'll be able to see, what does Jonathan need? And I'll be able to respond to that. Maybe you don't need anything. Maybe you need a hug. Maybe you need to be alone. And then I can skillfully and in harmony with my surroundings and the people around me and myself, because I'm also aware of myself. So for example, I'm not going to start doing things that, if I'm totally knackered that day and I don't have the energy to help other people, then that'll also be in my information.
What I notice in you, Thorbjørn, is that even if you are very tired and you and you articulate that, you're still extremely sensitive to, at least when we're even today, for instance, early today.
Right.
In my what is in me,
Right.
And so much so that you're able to kind of ask the question maybe people would avoid asking, or that kind of but I just noticed you're very, very, very sensitive, right, to knowing what is there. And I'm just curious, like, whether that comes from this place of meditation, or being in that, it's in such alignment with your senses that you're able to kind of experience that, the feeling or the energy, or in the other person, for example me today, or with you and your clients, or kind of in such a way where it's so accurate, actually, most of the time. Well,
for me, it's not. For me, there's no big difference whether I'm looking into myself or into someone else. It's not really different for me, and the reason is that I'm just here with what is. That's the one thing. The one thing is that I'm just here with what is. But the second thing is, which we've talked about, is I also trust my intuitions.
Yeah.
I trust them absolutely. It doesn't mean I'm never wrong.
Yeah.
It just means I'm more often right than I'm wrong. And sometimes when I'm wrong, I'm not actually wrong. It's just the other person either doesn't want to admit it or doesn't see it.
So would you say that this path of meditation, or the path of, you said meditation, right?
Actually, Harvard just released a study that showed us that the way to get emotional intelligence is to achieve self-awareness. So this is something I've known for many years, but if you want to understand others better, just study yourself. Study your own emotions, your own thought process. Look inside yourself and see what is actually going on. What is this whole slideshow inside me on the daily? What is my inner experience? They now confirm with studies that is what makes you emotionally intelligent. And when you can see how other people feel, like I can with you sometimes, that I would say is emotional intelligence.
And so how do you do that? Like, if you're one of the listeners here, or me, for example, and you're like, okay, I want to, self-awareness is really important to me, or meditation, maybe just self-awareness, say. And emotional intelligence is really important to me. And I want to work with that.
Right.
What is something practical that you can kind of give the listeners or me or someone to kind of, from your own, what you do currently or your own experience?
I would say, like the things that I did, I would say, first of all, of course, a meditation practice is invaluable in this. Because in a meditation practice, if you have a certain amount of minutes you meditate every day, however many or few it is, if you sit down, you feel your body, what is going on in your body, feel your emotions, what is going on in your emotions, you look at your thoughts, what is going on in your thoughts. That is pure self-knowledge, that is self-observation. And the more clear you become about your own inner experience, the more you realize that everyone is the same. And the interesting thing about people is, we always say that people are very different. People are not different. People may have different thoughts, but the way their thoughts function is the same. People may have different emotions, but their emotions function the same. And in that way, once you grasp the basic structure of how thoughts, emotions, and bodily reactions are, you get a really deeply penetrating understanding of all people, because people have 5 major emotions or something like that. That's it. And then there are nuances or whatever. But basically everyone is afraid of something. Everyone loves something. Everyone knows the feeling of shame. Everyone has these very basic experiences. And then the complicated part where people are different is, some people are afraid of snakes. Some people get ashamed when they spend money on themselves. People have very unique ways of displaying the exact same experiences and traits. Right. Yeah. So people do the same things with very different things. So if you can understand your basic inner experience, you will understand everyone. And this is a big thing with leaders these days, because we have a lot of leaders. We have a lot of a call to have better leaders, and we have a lot of leaders that want to be better. And there's nothing you can do, no course you can take, nothing you can learn, no intention you can have that will make any difference other than just start studying yourself. And sit and meditate and look at your inner experience. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would recommend is check in regularly during the day. What do I mean? Specifically, check in and say, how am I feeling right now? What is going on in my body right now? Is it tense? Is it upset? Is my breath going fast, slow, whatever? What is the state of my body? And what kind of thoughts are going on in my mind? And especially check in whenever you're in a stressful situation or you're going into a stressful situation. This checking in will give you a snapshot of what is happening in your inner experience, and a lot of your inner experiences which spiral towards a negative, they actually will come to a halt when you become aware of them, because knowingly or unknowingly, you're always participating in your inner experience through thinking. So if you're going a bad place emotionally on the job because maybe you have to go and talk with a difficult colleague or bring bad news, or maybe you screwed up, whatever it was, you're always unconsciously engaging with certain thoughts that are creating certain emotions, which are creating certain physical sensations. In other words, if you're fearful, you create fearful emotions, and then you create a tense, anxious, shallow breathing, disturbed nervous system. But if you then check in, if you've taught yourself to check in, even though you're really on this roll, you're all the way into your anxiety, but you have taught yourself to check in a few times an hour. The moment you check in, the whole process is like you pulling the curtain and looking behind and seeing what's actually going on. At that moment, you become aware that you are in the middle of perpetuating a negative cycle. And at that moment, that cycle will, at the very least, stop, and at the very least change. May not completely end, but because you became aware of it, something will be different. And so that's how you cultivate emotional intelligence. That's, if you want to understand others, you just have to look to understand yourself. And the more you understand yourself, the more you will stop with the negative cycles in your life, which create negative emotions, negative physical symptoms, and which eventually will lead to disease and stress and needing a lot of rest to recover.
Yeah. So it sounds like taking the time for yourself, like to just kind of sit there, you know, and with the first thing you said about meditating, or just kind of like noticing how am I feeling, what are my thoughts,
right?
What is my breath, kind of just, and then this other part of checking in, which you went into detail then. It seems like that's a huge thing for getting to know yourself better, or your emotional intelligence, but also preventing a lot of psychological trauma, I guess you could say.
So true. So
or
psychological
like,
stress.
Yeah, psychological
burnout.
Stress, and a lot of stress. And I mean, who wouldn't choose that, right?
Indeed.
If you had that choice, it's like, what is it? You said checking in twice a day, twice an hour. Or something.
Checking in twice an hour, for example.
Yeah, so checking in twice an hour and just asking yourself, how am I feeling? Or what am I feeling? What are my thoughts doing? What is going on right now in my body?
If I can just interject.
Yeah.
Our experience can always be divided into three aspects.
Yeah.
There is our thinking, there is our feelings, and then there is whatever's going on in the body, the physical sensations or symptoms. And so checking in means to just run through that list and see what is my inner experience. Because that inner experience is going to define how you feel, and it's going to define your outer experience. Because if your inner experience is anxious and you're not aware of it, then everything you do during that day will be from that anxious energy, which will perpetuate the feeling of anxiousness and create negative consequences. Because if you are in a state of anxiousness, you're going to make choices that make you more anxious and make other people anxious. And generally, that are, as we talked earlier, you're reacting to yourself, not the environment. So all your actions are unskillful because you're reacting to the fact that you're afraid. And so you're doing things based on it's sort of what you talked about earlier. You're doing things based on a reality that you are creating, not the actual reality. And so all your actions are out of place, out of sync, they're reactive. So you're reacting instead of responding. When you respond, you respond out of what is. When you react out of who you are and what you've brought with you. And so
you're letting like the ego kind of just like react to what's going on outside of you, based on the anxiety or based on the fear or based on your thoughts or your mind, instead of coming into your environment or your senses or your direct experience of you and the other person.
Right.
Coming into your feeling and your noticing your thoughts and your body and kind of that place. And it sounds like, from what you said before as well, checking in with your feelings, with your thoughts, with your body, and how that's kind of where that is at right now.
Right.
Brings an awareness.
Exactly.
And that awareness helps with
everything.
Not with everything, and it doesn't always help with it going away, but it helps with it perpetuating it or making it much bigger than where it's at that point in time.
Right.
And then you can choose, well, just to be in that, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. And open up to that.
And when you are taken over by your own reactions, because I liked your example, so I'm elaborating on that. Let's say you're the boss at some company, and you're taken over by your own reactions, and in front of you is an employee. Now that employee has emotions and thoughts and has situations and a mood and all this stuff. But since you're not aware of the environment, you're not taking this person into consideration. And so your actions are completely disregarding the person in front of you. And an action that flows from a disregard of the people in front of you will have consequences. Because now you're not in tune with that person, so whatever you'll do will not be what this person needs. And they're going to carry that, and they're going to do that to someone else down the line, because now they have to carry your emotional reactivity has now made them reactive. And so through not being in a responsive state of mind, but a reactive state of mind, we're slowly creating problems that will either manifest today or later down the line. And at that point, because you were reactive, you'll be reacting to those problems as well, which will be making it worse. So
if we come back to like not the beginning, but if we come back to like,
right,
if you want to choose the responsive state,
right,
or like kind of be in that place more, and be able to notice your environment,
right,
then meditation, at least the way of you talking about meditation,
right,
is a clear path, you could say, towards cultivating that.
Right. I don't know of any other way, actually.
Well, that sounds very definite.
I haven't found any other way. Yeah. I don't know if there is one, but I haven't found any other way.
Yeah. Well, there you go, folks. That's the. There's no other way. This is the way meditation. And I want to
say, because someone listening to the example might say, well, I have the best intention for my colleagues, for my employers, and so on. But that's actually, having good intentions is actually also a problem. And this we're going to go a little deeper now, and then we'll probably round it out. But a lot of the problems in the world happens because people try to be good or have good intentions. Actually, one of the biggest problems in the world, because if I'm sitting in front of Jonathan, if Jonathan is my colleague, and I'm sitting in front of Jonathan and I have good intentions, am I then responding to Jonathan? Am I taking Jonathan's state into consideration and my own state and responding out of that? No, I'm reacting to my good intentions. And is that what Jonathan needs? No, it's not what he needs. So good intentions are also a kind of reactivity, and it's a kind of illusion because it's not responding to the environment. Life always wants you to respond to life, not to your own ideas. And whether these ideas are good or bad, always going to create trouble, because good intentions do not allow you to see what is in front of you. And so you may do something with a good intention, and you may say, I am good because I had a good intention, which already should show you why you're doing it. You're doing it because it's a way of being good, and you don't become good by trying to be good. You become good by looking at what is and seeing, this is another way you could practice it. If you ask yourself, what does this moment need of me? What does this moment need from me? And then you observe. And then what comes out of that, you can do if you want to. But preconceived notions, even the ones that are meant from a deeply good place, I'm sorry to say, but there's still a way to disregard the other person. Just see what is in front of you and then respond. What else could ever work?
Thorbjørn, this hurts my ego. What are you trying to say to me that, and I know I want to kind of just say this out loud because I'm sure for people listening, maybe this is also coming up.
Yeah.
But at least for me, it's like, I spent like many years cultivating this thing of like, or just not even cultivating, just like everywhere around me, it's so normal to have good intentions about somebody else, or about your work ethic, or about whatever that is, about relationships and things like that. And so for me, it's like, what you're saying right now is very different to that.
Right.
And kind of, it squashes that.
Right.
And my ego is like, you can't squash that because that's such an important part of
right.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, what have you got?
Well, one of my acquaintances on LinkedIn the other day, she wrote this post. And she said, I always try to see the best in people, she wrote. And at that point I knew something had gone wrong, because that's a terrible thing to do. But she said, I always try to look at the best in people. And I had a client and I knew something was off, but I always try to see the best in people. So I did work for the client, and I lost $20,000. 20,000 crowns. And that was a shock to me. And she went back and forth about how she was bitter about it. And someone in her comments were like, I know you're doing the right thing and blah blah. She basically supported her, and she was kind of saying, wow, this unjustful thing happened to you, what a shame, and just keep being you and whatever. Actually, in reality, she brought this on herself. It was 100% self-inflicted, because she had a client in front of her. The moment told her, do not work with this person. She said as much. Do not work with this person. She clearly distinguished that in the moment. That is what she discerned. And then a thought came up that says, no, I have to see the best in people. And so she did, but there was nothing good to see in this person. And so she lost 20,000 crowns. But the tragedy is not that she lost that money. The tragedy is that she felt as if life cheated her. And she felt bitter because she did the right thing and life should have rewarded her. That's how she saw it, because she tried to be good. But trying to be good, it doesn't help the scammer. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anyone. Don't try to be good. Just try to be in alignment with the situation. Try to do what the situation needs. And then people say, but if I don't look at the good in people, then I'm not good. And that kind of shows you that you only look for the good in people because you want it to be good. So that's an ego reason. That's already a bad motivation. But
if you experience the good in you,
but here's the thing that here's the alternative I would offer. When you meet someone and that person is not good for you, it doesn't mean you have to judge them. It doesn't mean you have to say that they're a bad person. You can treat them with compassion. You can do what the situation needs of you. But you have to listen to what your instincts are telling you. And we live in Denmark. It's a good place to be. So the world is rarely dangerous, but it can still be dangerous in some situations. Sometimes, if you don't listen to this, you can get seriously hurt. And in other parts of the world, if you don't listen to this, you'll die. So listen to what your instincts are telling you. And remember that you're not a bad person because you see that there's something bad in a person. You can simply, if you want to be a good person, then just accept that this person is where they are, accept their flaws, accept that they have a bad intention in mind, and then just leave them with peace. Just say, I'm going to release you with kindness. That's being a good person, if you want to be a good person. But don't confuse goodness and stubbornness, because if you stubbornly want to put your values onto the situation, onto people, then life is very compassionate. It will teach you every time. Every time you think that your ideas are more important than reality, life will tell you that reality comes first. And it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are, reality comes first. And I always say this, that if you want to know what good intentions are worth in this life, go outside on a day where there's no wind, throw a rock directly up into the air, and wish with all your heart, all your good intentions, that this rock goes somewhere else than back down in your face, and see what happens. Because that rock will land in your face every single time. This is not bitter or cynical. It just means that you have to respect reality.
And when you say respecting reality, you're talking about responding to your environment through your senses.
Right.
And through that part of yourself.
Right, and we see it a lot in relationships, right? Like one person. There's this famous quote which I like. Is like, it says, "When people tell you who they are, listen to them." And so it's often used in conjunction with relationship advice, because often early in the relationship, one partner will say something or show some kind of behavior. And this behavior quite clearly shows the other one that they're not compatible for the relationship that they want. But the person is in love, and so they actively suppress this evidence that they just got. And they tell themselves, no, he didn't mean it, or she didn't mean it, or they make up rationalizations. They take the proof that the situation gave them, reality in front of them, and they rationalize it away because they really want a relationship with this person. But that's putting your own ideas before reality, because reality just told you this person is not compatible. If someone suddenly shows a behavior which is clearly problematic, and I say this with as much kindness as I can muster, but if you ignore reality for your own desires and delusions, and trust me, I've done the same, I'm sure Jonathan has done, we've all done it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, if you ignore reality because of your ideas and what you want, then you must understand that it's a kindness when you get punished and you are seeing that reality is just reality. Someone's not gonna, if someone treats you rudely the first time you meet them, don't go and dream of them being nice to you one day. When people show you who they are, listen. So this, I have a dream that one day we won't tell people to be good, because goodness creates so many problems.
Yeah.
Because it's a kind of, because when people do things that don't work, they stop. But with goodness, they think they're doing a good thing. So they'll keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, get the same disastrous result. People will be people pleasers all their lives, and people will take advantage of them all their lives, and they'll keep doing it because they think it's a good thing.
So it sounds like meditation, or kind of this path, I guess you'd say. Let's just call it meditation.
Right.
Is a clear way for us all to know, to experience our environment, to experience our senses, what's happening in our reality in that moment.
Right.
And to get, and through this, I keep going to say practice, but through this non-practice, you could say.
Well, you can call it a practice.
Yeah.
It's just important to say that it requires no effort.
All right, through this practice, then, that requires no effort, like you say, we are able to just like distinguish, I guess, between what's happening in our minds and what's happening in the other part of ourselves, to know the truth, or know, like, kind of, and to be able to listen to that truth, I guess. Right. You could say, and follow that truth. And
or at least to be as absolutely, it may not be the absolute truth if people don't like that.
Yeah.
That word, but at least to be as absolutely informed as you can through the data that is available to you, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that informed data is something that comes to you when you're able to be quieter in your minds, I guess you could say.
Right.
Because the louder we are in our minds, the less likely we're going to actually pick up on this information, or this truth, or whatever comes to us. And we're just going to react from our minds.
Right, when we're full of ourselves, that's all we see.
Yeah, but this other practice, this other meditation, or this other path, you could say, brings us back into this space of responding to our environment in the moment, and in experiencing that reality for what it is, and the other people in that experience. Right. And being able to be sensitive to that other person, to understand what it is that's going on, feeling wise, body wise, thinking wise, and that in itself is an invaluable skill for life, in relationships and work, in
absolutely
all areas of life, to cultivate and to bring about that self-awareness. It's like, I mean, what else is there? You know, like that's see clearly, act clearly, live a good life. Yeah.
I think that's probably episode 2 of Conversations in the Yurt. We ended up talking a lot about me here, unfortunately, but hopefully it will be useful to someone.